welcome back to the show. I have a special guest today. His name is Brett Garsed, and Brett is the former long-term guitarist of the John Farnham Band. He's recently released his latest single called From the Inside, which we've played on the radio the last few weeks, and it sounds great. It is off the album Guitars for Veterans Australia second tour album, which, as you know, we've been explaining that this particular wonderful charity supports veterans through music and guitars. So, Brett, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Biagio. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you taking the time. So, Brett, congratulations. A great track. I've been playing it the last few weeks since you released it, because it was released on the 18th of October. And it's had some great feedback. Sounds great. How did you come about writing this particular one?
You know, that song's been kicking around for quite a while. I was living in America way back just before the turn of the century. So it was late 90s. And I remember just sort of coming up with those chords. And I'm pretty sure they were a mistake. I just went to play one chord and went to play an E, and an E flat came out, and I just loved the sound of it. And it just led to the next chord and the next chord. And the next thing I knew, I was driving to my friend's place, and I just heard the chorus in my head in my car. I had an old car at the time that didn't have a radio or a cassette player or even a CD player or anything like that. So I had to listen to the music in my head, and that chorus just came to me. And it took me until, I think it was 2020, when the pandemic started, and I just had all this time on my hands, and I thought, I have to revisit that song. I did a solo album called Big Sky that I released back in about 2003. And I did actually track the song instrumentally for that album, and in the hopes it would make the album, but I ended up not using it. And I thought, I should revisit that. So in the end, I just, put my head down and got stuck into my home recording here and did it.
Yeah, it is a fantastic track. Our listeners can't see what I can see on the Zoom, but you've got a very good, great studio organised there, your room there. So Brett, your career, when did it all start? You've been in the game for a little bit, and you obviously mentioned you did tour with John Farnham's band. When did it all start with?
I started here in the town I'm actually living in again, which is Castlemaine, Victoria. And I just started a pub band with my cousins when I was about 12. And by the time I was 13, we were actually gigging in pubs around this little town. And we essentially did that for 10 years. I mean, I sort of just stayed with that little band, and I did a plumbing apprenticeship here in town. So it was the usual thing for us country boys to do, where you'd leave school a bit early and get an apprenticeship. So I did all that. And I just decided, what I obviously wanted to do was be a professional musician, and the hopes was to eventually get to Melbourne and perhaps be in a professional cover band. That's about as low as I set the bar. I thought, well, if I can just get in a working cover band and not be a plumber. Nothing against plumbing; it's a great trade, but and boy do we need them. But I just had music in my blood, and I wanted to do that. And I started to send out some demo tapes. And one of the addresses I found was the Wheatley organisation, and Glenn turned out to be the only person that really responded.
Fantastic.
And it was just the most beautiful letter that I've framed and put on my wall. And it's just, "Dear Brett, I got your tape, please call me." And this was in 1985, about October of 85. And he said John Farnham would want to do a pub tour just to keep his chops up, and while he was still in the Little River Band at the time.
Yeah.
And he asked if I would like to be a part of it. And it was just, because I'd seen John perform at Bathurst in 1981. I mean, I'd already been a fan of John's when Uncovered came out, and also when he joined LRB, because I was always an LRB fan, and when John joined that band, I thought, man, now they're going into the stratosphere with him singing for them. And we saw them perform at Bathurst when they built an amphitheatre there for bands to play at, and I was just so blown away with him. He was the first singer I'd ever seen or heard that could absolutely obliterate what he did on the albums. Like, he was holding back on the albums and was much better live. Whereas usually when I'd go and see real power singers, they could sing their hearts out on the albums, but they got pretty winded and tired when they played live. But John was the opposite. I'd never seen anything like it. So yeah, when the offer came up to tour with him, I was like, well, this is weird. He's the one singer I'd most like to tour with. So what an offer.
Yeah, that's a fantastic opportunity. And you know what? You're 100% right. I went and saw him a couple of times live at the Entertainment Centre. I think I was in my teens, and we went to see him, and mate, he was just belting them out then, and he was sensational. I'm not just
Yeah.
saying it because I'm interviewing you and we're talking about it, but he was better live than the record.
Yeah, he's an absolute force of nature. So that was late '85, and then the following year, I went back to my plumbing job, and then in about June, I went down to Melbourne and we recorded the Whispering Jack album, and
Right.
I did all the guitars on that, and then went back to plumbing again, and then after I think it was a few months later, we started to actually go out and tour the album, and we put the band together and started to go out touring, and that was it. Here I am, nearly 40 years later, and the only reason we stopped was because of the pandemic, and
Yeah,
then of course John's illness. But
of course.
I'd love to hear him sing again. I hope it can happen one day. We all do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but everybody's got to be patient as well because what he's been through is really a difficult thing. So, but it's great to see him now doing his Audible book. But with you, when you were touring with him, would that have been like the early '90s, the big tours that you used to do at those center tours? You would have been there playing the guitar there,
Yeah, I was there from the start actually. Like we started off doing pubs. That was in '86. And that was to support Whispering Jack when it first came out. And of course, I'm sure Glenn and the booking agents were just getting anything they could, and it just escalated so fast. It went so crazy so fast that I think they quickly realised we've got to get into bigger venues, and we started to do more entertainment centre-sized venues. And I think back at that time, Rod Laver hadn't even been built here in Melbourne, so we did the first big gig we did was a support with Whitney Houston at the Sydney
wow.
Entertainment Centre. That was the first time that I heard a roar of a crowd like that, because the place was packed by the time we went on, because John had the number one album and single. I'm
Yeah,
sure Paul Whitney thought she'd been stitched up because the support act was the biggest act in the country at the time, and she was sensational, by the way. We got to stay and watch her show one night, but that was incredible. It was I'll never forget the roar of that crowd for the first time, because we'd only previously been doing pubs, but it escalated so fast. And then by the time of about 1988, we were doing the tour with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, and so we're doing nothing but arenas. And John was I'm pretty sure John was the only act that was able to do actual weeks in a place the size of Rod Laver Arena. Like he held a record there. I think Pink broke it quite a few years ago for the number of consecutive shows Rod Laver. But yeah, John was capable of doing 2 weeks there,
yeah.
and even international acts would be lucky if they could do 2 or 3 nights. But yeah, it got huge pretty fast. Then I went to America in 1990, and that was when John did the Chain Reaction tour. So Jack Jones and Phil Buckle from Southern Sons played guitars on that tour. But then I came back in '94 and then pretty much just started working with John again. I was so grateful that he had me back after defecting to America for a while. But yeah, I did all the massive tours. It was so much fun.
And in America, when you were there, were you touring individually or were you recording somewhere?
Yeah, I went there to join a band called Nelson, which was actually the twin sons of Rick Nelson,
Right.
Matthew and Gunnar Nelson. And we ended up recording an album for Geffen Records, and it was huge. We had a number one single, a national number one single, and the album went on to sell, I think it was 5 million copies. It was a big record. And we ended up touring. We spent most of 1991 on the road. We pretty much toured for a year straight, did the whole American experience in a bus,
Right.
and it was just sensational fun. It was a really unique experience, and I mean, it was heartbreaking for me to leave John's band. I often question my sanity in doing that, but at the same time, to the opportunity to go there and play with Matt and Gunnar and the rest of that band for a year in America was just such an invaluable experience, especially for an Aussie. That didn't come along very often, and I ended up living there for about 13 years. I moved back to Australia permanently in 2003, and I've been here ever since. So it
Right.
was a unique experience, that's for sure.
And the difference between the US music industry and the Australian, is there much difference, Brett?
Just magnitude, really. I mean, with America, I mean, you drive 2 hours and you're in another city that's got 5 million people in it. And whereas in Australia, you've got your major capital cities and then smaller regional areas, and that's all it is. We've got just as many great musicians here and just as many great bands, and it's just we don't have the population to really sustain a big touring industry. That's why John was such an anomaly, because he would attract almost three generations. Like, he was attracting young people when his new albums would come out. He'd attract their parents, and even in some cases grandparents that remembered him from the 60s and 70s. And so he would just be packing these places out with entire families coming to see him. So it was more like the American experience. In fact, when John would tour, he would pump so much of his money back into the production with the light shows and the stages that I think it must have been invaluable for Australian crews to get to experience building productions like that and touring them, because otherwise it would have only been overseas artists that were really doing shows of that size.
Yeah, and you're right about the production. It was, I remember now, there was a massive lighting show. Production was fantastic when I saw John. And you're right about the generations. I remember now sitting there, there was a young, obviously we were young, and then there was some older people, then older people. So it
Yeah.
had everyone there. And now I remember going back and picturing it at the entertainment centre. But so Brett, what's happening moving forward for you?
Look, it's just mainly day-to-day session work here that I usually do from home, and I do the odd live gig, things like that. But it's quieter for me now, so I mainly just sort of work on my own music here at the house, and happy with my family. I'd love to be playing more, but the opportunities just don't really exist, and that's why when the opportunity came to present From the Inside for this wonderful album,
Yeah.
I asked Dave Cox if I could submit it, and he liked the song. And we actually ended up re-recording. Lee Bradshaw did a fantastic string arrangement, which was recorded by a string section in Budapest, and he had some fantastic ladies doing some backing vocals on it. So the song does sound different from the first version I did back in 2020. And then Dave Carr did the most incredible mix on it. But I was just so honoured to have it featured on this album, because it's such a fantastic cause, the Guitars for Vets
Yeah.
Australia organisation. What they do is wonderful, and I'm just so grateful that they decided to include my song for it. I hope it's a success for them.
Yeah, it's a very important cause, and it's a great album. We've been playing a number of tracks off there, thanks to the crew of, who introduces Pop Preservation Society, Michael Matthews and crew down there. And we, of course, your track From the Inside is one of those tracks that's fantastic. So, Brett, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me today here on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And hope we can chat again soon. If you have any new music coming, let us know. We're happy to chat and go from there. And I wish you all the best with not only you and the whole team with the Guitars with Veterans for this album, and hope it raises a lot of money and help a lot of people.
Agreed. Thanks, Biagio.
No worries, Brett. You have a great day and a great weekend. Thank you.
You too. Thanks, mate. Bye.
Bye.